Welcome back to the 2025-2026 INTEREACH webinar series from myself and the rest of the INTEREACH team. And we will introduce ourselves in a little bit, but to get us started here, as we're expecting some more people to keep trickling in, I'm actually going to turn it over to Kristine Hendren to continue with this welcome and introduce the series for this season. So take it over, Kristine.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Amalia, for welcoming everybody so well. And as Amalia said, we're so happy to see you again. Remind me who has the advancing capabilities. Can we go to the next slide? Awesome. So we're really excited. The five of us who are now co-leading INTEREACH have a really exciting series for everybody. This happens to be the 10th anniversary, as you've all seen through our emails about this series, of the Gabriele Bammer i2Insights blog and repository, which is such a special reference point and resource, I know, for many of us. And so this whole series throughout the academic year, we're going to tour through some various themes that emerged across the 10 years in celebrating the 10-year birthday. So we can't wait to do that, and we're going to do it in a dialogue fashion that we'll talk about just a little bit. Next slide would be perfect. Thanks. So we are celebrating not only what Gabriele has put together, but also the community that she's really formed. So there's this blog, but also the repository and the incredible conversations that happen live within the blog and repository of both tools and prior publications. Over the past decade, i2Insights has drawn on the decade prior to that, or a little more, of Gabriele's work to share ideas and tools for integration and implementation to help formalize the integrative data sets. And data sets, as we know on this call, means 25 plus different things, probably however many people are on the call, that's how many or more. And then it's also just advanced our understanding of transdisciplinary approaches to complex problems with this real intersection of practitioner and study. And so we're going to take a tour through all that and open up lots of conversations through the next few months, 10 months. Okay, and the next slide will tell you what we have lined up. You will also be able to find this on interreach.org on our upcoming webinar series tab, I think. I can go and drop that in for anybody who wants to follow along anytime. But as Amalia foreshadowed, and we'll probably remind again, please remember to hold the second Tuesday of each month. I don't know, we had some bugs in our calendar system, and we felt like it was just sending out blasts to folks every time, and we could not control it. So we decided to let people have their own inboxes back, but just want to mention to please hope that people kind of hold the time and still join us. So we're going to go through several of these different topics, and each one has two people that have co-authored or authored blogs. Thank you, Kim, for dropping in that upcoming webinars link. So embodied and arts-based practices is going to be in November. Systems and complexity methods will be December. Leadership practices for collaborative teams. Excited to have that in the new year of 2026. Professionalization of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary careers, near and dear to our hearts in INTEREACH, of course. Participatory methods at institutional levels. Building competencies, integration frameworks, and also decolonization and epistemic justice are the other themes. Now, there's many more amazing ones that could have emerged, but these were 10 really strong ones, and it was really interesting that they kind of spanned and grew over the course of the decade. So I also want to point out that Gabriele Bammer herself was really involved and instrumental in helping us. She was very gracious about the invitation to be highlighted here and have the INTEREACH series dive into her, celebrating the 10-year anniversary of what she's created in the community. And although she can't join us live, she is very much part of the fabric of what has been put together and the people who are going to be joining us. So this is going to be an exciting and kind of expanding time for the INTEREACH community, as we have mostly been US centric, just due to the shape of the earth and size of it. Basically is really a time zone problem, but we do recognize that it's a very global community that is doing this work, and this is an opportunity for us to invite in the global south, people in other time zones and regions that are doing this important work through the series. Okay, so the structure of the series on the next slide is really just going to be following dialogues. So we're going to have, in each of these cases, 10-minute presentations by each panelist, and then 10 to 15-minute dialogue between the panelists, kind of mulling over some of the questions and the topics that come up, and then 15 to 20-minute discussion within the INTEREACH community. So that's what we're going to try for this season, so that it's a real ongoing conversation, which kind of mirrors the experience of reading and participating in the Insights or i2Insights blog and repository itself, because it's always an ongoing and kind of evergreen conversation, even when we are looking back at 10 years ago, the different posts. So that's how we'll do this going forward. This time for the kickoff, Gabriele invited us to model a version of what this structure is going to look like. It's not going to be exactly that, but we're going to kick it off with a 10-minute presentation by Gabriele herself remotely. So we've got to have a video, and then we're going to have reflections from each of us on the leadership team as a way to start the conversation and model what we thought a good dialogue would be. And really what Gabriele, we invited her to be curious about, what would she like to hear from this community, and get the reaction from all of us and input and kind of dialogues with her as well, even though it's asynchronous. So we'll do that. And I think I'm going to invite at this point, before we go to the next slide, to hear a word from Gabriele. Is there anything that any of my co-leaders, Kristine, Amalia, Alison, Kim, want to add to what I've just framed for the hopes for this season?
No, I don't think so.
Nothing for me.
Awesome. Well, then, hearing that, I think the next slide just says that we are going to have a, this is us. This is who will reflect on it afterward. And we decided to do that in alphabetical order, because that's a great way to do things when you can't decide. It also just happens to be that will highlight our newest leadership team members first, which we're very excited to do. Setting the stage here, then, I am going to transition over to Gabriele Bammer herself.
Hi, everyone. Let me start by thanking INTEREACH for helping celebrate the 10th birthday of Integration and Implementation Insights, and for inviting me to talk a bit about the origins, some surprises, and where next. I'm really sorry I can't be with you, middle of the night for me, but if you have questions or comments, please put them in the comments, and I'm sure they'll be passed on, and I'll do my best to address them. So I wanted to start a bit about talking about the origins, and there's been a driving question for my research for the last more than 20 years, 25 or more years. And it's about, when we tackle complex societal and environmental problems, how do we find the useful tools, concepts, methods, processes, frameworks? And we know that they're in systems thinking, inter and transdisciplinarity, action research, science of team science, but how do we bring them together? And that's been kind of the driving question for me. These all operate in silos. How do we bridge those silos? The origins came about in a particular way, I guess, for me. So I should point out that it wasn't possible to study systems thinking or inter and transdisciplinarity in the 1970s when I was an undergraduate. In fact, right at the end of my undergraduate work, people just started to talk about multidisciplinarity. And I spent the first 20 years or so of my career ricocheting through the university trying to find where this multidisciplinarity stuff hung out. In the 1990s, as a mid-career, I had the opportunity to lead a research project on a complex problem. And what was really clear was that there was very little guidance on how to do it, and we operated by the seat of our pants. And after 7 years, when it was all over, I was really interested in what we could have used if we'd known about it, and had the opportunity to go to a bunch of conferences, including the World Congress on System Sciences, the Association for Interdisciplinary Studies Conference. INSIGHTS didn't exist then, transdisciplinarity conferences didn't exist then, but I went to what there was and discovered they were tiny, they were really useful. None of them covered all the territory. All of them had something useful to offer. And so that really made me start thinking about how do we bring this together? How do we bridge these silos? And I started thinking about, well, what if we had a discipline of integration and implementation sciences? And the point of that discipline was to be the plumbing that connected all of these different approaches and made all of their valuable stuff useful. It wasn't about homogenizing them, it was about maintaining the differences because they've got interesting historical and theoretical differences, but it was about how do we harness the tools that they all provide. So our initial step was to develop a website for integration and implementation sciences in 2002. It had resources that I found and added. We produced a newsletter every 2 months that advertised a new resource. And the reality is that the newsletter was the trigger to go and find a resource. So scramble around, find a resource, put it on the website, and then we could publish it in the newsletter. The positive of that is that it showed by that starting small but continuing over time allowed you to build a pretty substantial toolkit. The negative was that the toolkit was a bit haphazard and opportunistic because of the way that it was formed. And not that long ago, we decided to dismantle it because it was no point trying to run 2 toolkits at the same time. And we moved the useful resources, most of them at least, across to i2Insights. The opportunity to do a blog and repository, the opportunity for i2Insights came about when through the US National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Centre, which in 2015 invited me to be a theme leader, which meant I had oversight of 3 projects. And my job as theme leader was to look for synergies between the projects. What could they learn from each other? And I thought that a blog that they contributed to might be a useful thing to do. And so that's what we did. It meant that I had a captive audience to start the blog, which was very, very useful. People were reasonably happy to do it. And at the end of the day, so the blog became a way of sharing resources across the projects, and this tag lets you see all the resources. And at the end of the day, we ended up with 63 contributions, and the blog currently has just under 600, so more than 10% of the contributions came through this opportunity with Succinct. I was asked to talk a bit about surprises, and I want to talk about 3. So one is that there have been some really high achieving posts, which was a bit of a surprise. This graph shows on the vertical axis the number of posts, on the horizontal axis the number of views. There's a break in the scale on the vertical axis, and there's also some truncated data. And I'm going to talk about some of the truncated data. So there was a post in 2017 which has had almost 500,000 views, and there's another post in 2022 which is catching up fast. It's already had 100,000. Why? No idea. An inkling is that occasionally I'll get a ping back, which means that somebody cites the blog and then asks you in return to cite them, and it'll come from an undergraduate student who's doing and it'll be in an essay that they've written. So I'm assuming that the blog's been picked up by students as part of their undergraduate coursework. To give you an idea of what those large numbers mean, the median lifetime views currently is just under 900. Another surprise is that it's been widely viewed, which has been fantastic. So the United Nations has 193 member nations, and it's been viewed in all of them according to the stats from WordPress. It's a WordPress blog. This is a WordPress figure. I'm a bit dubious about the views from North Korea and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is in a major civil war, and South Sudan. But in any case, it's fair to say that it's been viewed quite widely. It is mainly viewed in the global north. The dark colours is where the most viewers are, but it's pleasing to see that India and South Africa have got darker colours, and that the number of views is growing. And as many of you will know, making the blog an outlet for people from the global south to talk about what they do is a hugely important aspect of what I've been trying to do. And the third surprise is that the index has been useful for revamping the framework. So this is the I2S framework, the discipline framework, as it was. This is the second version of it that was around in about 2000. It was about bringing together disciplinary and stakeholder knowledge, understanding unknowns, and bringing those together to develop support for policy and practice. Each of these should be seen as a pentagonal silo, and within those silos you had stored concepts and methods and guides. Try as I might, I could never really make that work as a way of organising the resources in either the original website or in i2Insights when it started. And then a couple of years ago, we started to think, well, maybe we should do something about this framework and work backwards. And it turned out that the way that we'd organised the resources in the blog was actually really useful for thinking about a framework for the discipline. I'm not going to go through this in detail. Some of you will have seen it, but it's kind of useful. It's maybe not that surprising because it happened in my brain and it means some neurons connected. But for me, it was a really pleasant surprise to find that the way that we'd used to organise the blog posts, which worked for all the blog posts that we've done, was also a way that we could develop a framework that worked more broadly for what it was that we were trying to do. So where next? We're going to celebrate on November the 25th with a celebratory blog post. We're going to do some minor rebranding from blog and repository to Global Comprehensive Living Toolkit. We're going to reinvigorate the aims, and we're going to invite people to contribute to strengthening how the toolkit meets those aims. So keep an eye out for that blog post in November, and it would be great to have your contributions. And of course, I'm also really curious about what's going to get triggered by this INTEREACH webinar series. The second thing that I've been thinking about is long-term sustainability. I'm not going to live forever, and so is this worth preserving? If so, what would be a good institutional home? What would we preserve? What would we change? Who would undertake the different tasks? How would we make it funded? So those are the things that are occupying me. And if you've got any comments on or questions on any of this, as I said, please put them in the comments, and I'll reply to that. I want to finish with a bunch of acknowledgements, particularly to Peter Dean, who's been an extraordinary colleague over the last 20 or more years. And let me also thank again INTEREACH for what's going to be a really exciting webinar series. I can hardly wait to listen to all the recordings. Thank you all very much.
Well, that, as always, leaves me extremely inspired at her ability to be clear and wonderfully collected and concise. And I'm also excited that the conversation that we are going to have now will be kind of a gift back that way, that hopefully gives some amount of thanks to Gabrielle for her intellectual generosity over the years. And just with that, I put a link to one of the prior webinars that Gabrielle gave, because she made a reference to, some of you will have seen this, in case anyone wants to check it out. So at this point, I think what a nice thing to do would be to begin modeling our dialogues. And Gabrielle had a couple of questions that she was particularly curious to think about us talking through. And so we are, as I mentioned, going to go through the 5 members of the leadership team, starting with Kim Bourne, and model this dialogue with just a few minutes of thoughts on these. Not all of them. People can touch on the ones that they feel called to answer in a couple minutes, and then we will open this up to the INTEREACH community to look at these same questions and the ones that speak to you in reflecting and joining the dialogue. So, Kim, would you like to go ahead and take the stage?
Sure, I'm happy to. I am going to ambitiously try to answer what are my favorite blog posts and how it has influenced my career at the same time. So bear with me. For some background, just to give context, my PhD was in environmental engineering, and I became really interested in kind of this participatory science, stakeholder engagement, and through that got connected with Kristine Hendren and got into the science of team science convergence world, and ended up working in that space for my postdoc, which has just recently, I just switched from a postdoc to a full-time position in March. So that is still very fresh for me. I'm very new to this world, and this blog was one of my first, when I was beginning my kind of deep dive into what is the science of team science, what is implementation, integration and implementation sciences. This blog was a real anchor for me. And I don't know if it's the universe or Gabrielle's like infinite wisdom, but there are blog posts that have just appeared at the exact right times. So when I was first getting into the science of my postdoc, we were working in a large science and technology center. And I think I saw Jenny on the call, but I came across her and Gemma Jiang's and Diane Bogart's blog about effective way to organize research coordination meetings. And I was like, perfect, I have to do that. And so that became an anchor for me, like a starting point for looking into, okay, what does it mean to, in an evidence-based way, design a meeting that works for these large centers and makes research effective. And it kind of began this trajectory of me going back to the blog over and over again. Anytime I had to do something new, that was my first step of really, okay, what are people saying about this topic? Where should I start in the literature? It's this great grounding mechanism for those questions I had as a new researcher in this space. And so that's continued. Even as I've transitioned, I'm now a project coordinator for an NSF research traineeship. And when I'm teaching these students, what does convergence look like? My first stop is, okay, what i2Insights blog can I point them to? It's, the perfect, I need you to get the, I need you to get the gist of kind of what it means to be a convergence researcher. And for a lot of people, the i2Insights blog is the first place I send them to, including like, I thought about one of the blogs recently was what roles do you play in inter and transdisciplinary projects? Like that's helped us think about how do I train these students to take on those roles and how do I evaluate what roles they're playing in these teams. Another happened to come up at the exact right time of me designing our capstone course. And that was a really, I think, just having that inspiration and that grounding for kind of my career has been enormously helpful. So I hope that kind of answers the two questions. And emphasizes how much I kind of rely on this blog as, you know, a source of information and inspiration for what I do in my everyday facilitation work. And I'll pass it on to Alison. I'll stop rambling and pass it on to Alison.
Thank you, Kim. I am Alison Deviney. I am a fourth-year postdoc at the same Science and Technologies for Phosphorus Sustainability, or STEP Center, where Kim was a postdoc. And it's really funny to me how parallel our graduate and postdoc trajectories were in terms we both studied engineering, but then ended up in this really interesting transdisciplinary space. So I'm really excited for this because my connection into i2Insights was really through systems thinking. It's kind of where my foray into this space started. And so I'm excited that systems and complexity are going to be part of our December theme for this particular series. And so part of the reason for that is sort of the real world just doesn't neatly divide itself into disciplinary boundaries for our convenience. But systems thinking methods, especially those that are outlined in the blogs that we see at i2Insights, can really help steer this sort of hodgepodge of disciplinary ships so that they're kind of sort of sailing in the same direction. And that's, to me, a very helpful way to think about it. There are dozens of, or at least a dozen systems thinking posts in the repository by so many different authors: Gerald Midgley, Derek and Laura Cabrera, Andre Savo, apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names here, Michael C. Jackson, many others, including our guest speakers in December, Catherine Hobbs and Jean Bolton. So one I particularly want to highlight, and I'm going to drop some links into the chat for several of these. Hopefully you can find some of these as useful as I did. But the one by Jeff Marlowe from October 3rd in 2023, titled Key Systems Thinking Lessons from Donella Meadows, highlights one of my favorite systems thinking authors. And the resilient self-organization hierarchy, which are these important systems characteristics, and how we use these representations or mental models to understand the world around us. So that's kind of my particular blog highlight. Again, there are many of these. I am still very new, like Kim said, to this whole concept and community, and there are so many I have not read yet. So I learned something from every single blog post that I have read. In terms of future directions, because I know this was something that Gabriele particularly mentioned both in her questions to us as a community, but also in her video, I think it's really a challenge to find resources like i2Insights that has both the variety and yet the same consistency throughout. And my first instinct is to say, don't change a thing. But I know that's a tall ask because nothing lasts forever. And too often we take for granted that the things that once they're on the web, they're always on the web, and that's not necessarily true. So I guess more realistically, I could maybe envision a future where the management burden of this really valuable resource could potentially become more maybe distributed to help support its longevity. I have no idea how to do that. But I think it's really important that we maintain this, especially the rigor of the current format and how it just embraces so many different ways of thinking. So that's kind of my 2 cents. And I guess I will pass this on to Kristine Glauber.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks, Kim, for kicking this off. There's so much wisdom in what you guys have both said, and I just am reflecting on the through lines that I'm planning to say, and I'm sure that Amalia and Kristine are going to add to kind of round us all out. But yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. One one of my favorite posts, and I won't be able to put it in the chat yet, but once I'm done sharing screen, I will put it in the chat, is it's titled 3 Complexity Principles for Convergence Research by Gemma Jiang. And Kim mentioned her, and I know she's going to be a speaker later in the series. And what really drew me to this post and continues to draw me to this post is the way that Gemma frames transformative containers, especially the container for affective relationships and the container for whole person immersion. She argues in complex convergence work, we can't just think our way through problems. We need spaces that invite people to connect and sense and feel and move together, not just intellectually, but also somatically and relationally. And this post really shifted how I show up in my facilitation and team science practice in a few concrete ways. So the first is foregrounding emotional and relational space. And now I intentionally design time for people to relate beyond the task. So to share stories, share tensions, and attune to each other across differences. And then the second is holding space for embodied presence. And the idea of this whole person immersion container reminds me that our bodies also matter in collaboration. And even in virtual sessions, I try to weave in brief grounding practices, check-ins, or embodied prompts so that people arrive in their bodies, not just their minds. And so yeah, so that's one of my favorite posts, and how the blog has influenced my professional practice. Looking ahead, as I'm rewatching Gabriele's video and taking into account what's going on in my professional sphere, I'm just realizing how much this blog, the blog and the repository is really just a wealth of information that I can continue to dig through and find things that as things shift, especially in this current landscape of the research ecosystem, there is so much that I can go back and really dig through to help serve me moving forward as well. So I just want to echo what Alison said, that I hope that we can figure out a way to distribute the labor beyond just Gabriele and Peter, and figure out a way to ensure longevity of this really incredible resource. So with that, I will pass it over to Kristine Hendren.
Thanks, Kristine. I will be really brief because you've already heard from me in framing kind of the reason for choosing this direction on behalf of our team. But agreeing with what my colleagues have said, I'm going to go ahead and put in my favorite. It's hard to choose one, but the one that really impacted me that I chose is called Recognizing Interdisciplinary Expertise by Gabriele Bammer on December 15th, 2017. And I put that in there because it just puts into words a lot of what the basis of our original connection, Gabriele's and mine, around this idea of being the arrow, that there needs to be a recognized set of experts and expertise and methods to make this an actual discipline. And it affected my professional practice and career trajectory because I eventually kind of went all in and decided, okay, I'm going to literally put I2S as my chosen discipline on proposals into the NSF, into NIH. And that's what I say. I don't have a degree in that because you cannot yet get one, but that's what I'm doing. And so she literally wrote the pathway of my career, the words of it, which I'm really honored to be able to try and show one direction that it could take. And I guess the future directions piece, I really love that Alison and Kristine, you kind of touched on the who is going to do the work. How do we, many hands make light the load type of thing. And I was thinking content wise, and when I was reflecting on this prompt, I really, having stepped into the pathway of trying to be a full-time integrator in these different roles, I am very interested in kind of calls to leadership as far as what are the next steps in conversations as we build organizationally new neural pathways, new convenings and conversations that maybe aren't part of the institutions as we find them now, but that are going to need to be normal parts of operating if we are going to continue integration and implementation sciences. And so I'm interested in that, very excited, and I will pass it to Amalia.
Great, thank you, Kristine. So I put the cart before the horse here and put in some links a little bit ago, but I'm gonna put them in there again and add one in there and say that I got involved essentially in integration roles early on in my career out of undergrad, actually, in starting as a consultant in environmental risk and toxicology. And was absolutely the luckiest person in the world in that I crossed paths with one Kristine Hendren, and early in her career when she was a postdoc and working at EPA, US EPA. And we connected, as we say, through track changes in a document that was trying to integrate all of these different perspectives and also proceed in the face of massive uncertainty and data paucity. And it was a really complex space to be in. And at that point in my career, there was really nothing that had prepared me for how you would systematically approach a problem like that, where there was no model for how to move forward. And all of the models and frameworks that were being thrown at this problem didn't quite fit. And so I got to actually see how Kristine approached this problem. And that a lot of that was through our mutual involvement in these expert elicitation workshops where Kristine led the charge on designing these massive workshops, multi-stakeholder workshops, to try to really get a very robust picture of how everyone might approach this problem of risk assessment for a kind of class of materials that didn't seem to follow the rules and didn't, where you weren't really able to use existing frameworks very easily. And so from that point forward, I managed to just sort of follow Kristine everywhere she went, in some unintentionally in some ways. But I bring this up because I went to grad school at Duke University, and the day that I started grad school, Kristine had started as the executive director for the center that I was working for there. And we didn't know that was going to happen. But that's how it happened. So then I also got to see her build this career, from starting off in this executive director role and absolutely building that role and building so many incredible kind of integrative mindsets and putting norms into place and systems for integration within this center. And so I got to be there when she started claiming I2S as her discipline. And so I bring all this up because one of the things that was very impactful to me in my career in trying to figure out that as a people connector and as someone that has always valued being the arrow or being the kind of the boundary spanner or the interstitial expert and really recognizing that there was skill and expertise there, as how then do I articulate that to those in my career when I'm looking for a job or with groups that I want to work with? How do I articulate what I have to offer and my value? And so this ties into i2Insights, because one of the things that I've gotten the most out of in the blog are the comments, the responses. And so the second link I put in there, or no, the third link I put in there, the do we need to discipline interdisciplinarity? So this was, a very early post from Gabriele Bammer in March of 2016. And in response to that post, Kristine put in this incredible comment, and that helped me to understand what a path could look like, but also what the tensions are in that role. And she later went on to kind of formally describe this in a separate publication. But I've come back to that comment and to other places where these kinds of tensions in these boundary spanning roles have been highlighted, because it's really helped me to normalize the fact, or accept that this is experimental, and we don't really know what we're doing, and we're experimenting forward. And so also on here, I have the last link on here is Idea Tree. So I've been designing workshops and facilitating workshops quite a bit in the last year, and I've really been looking for ideas on how in a short amount of time you're able to do some divergence and convergence and leave people with momentum. So I've really relied on i2Insights to help me identify tools and activities, and understand what to focus on. So this idea tree post, one thing that I actually loved about it, beyond the idea itself, was a comment from Julie Thompson Klein that essentially asked, when you're using this brainstorming tool, you get a lot of information, but have you seen, how have you seen people actually use this massive amount of information and ideas that have been put out there? And I don't know, there was something about that question, just someone kind of challenging and uh, even just looking for more information about, like, how does this work in practice? Because in my brain, I'm always wondering, what can we do that's going to be the most impactful? And asking these questions myself, to see a leader in this field just respond and be supportive of this proposed tool, but then also say, like, but think, like, how does it work from this point forward? And got a real discussion going around that. There was a very robust discussion after that. And so I've just loved this sort of, it's helped me to internalize that the imperfectionism of this role and embrace it. And so the other posts that I pointed to here are tools, the gradients of agreement I come back to again and again for group consensus. When I facilitate, I almost always say consensus is I can live with it. And groups really, that resonates with groups very strongly. And then the post on creative destruction, just seeing posts in the words of Keith McCandless, who's one of the founders of liberating structures, just this great set of tools and activities that we can use in kind of facilitating dialogue and decision making processes. i2Insights is my first stop for tools and for understanding theory, for understanding foundation, for understanding concepts. It has just been so helpful to me in my professional development and in understanding what careers could look like in this space. So I will stop this rush of wind out of my mouth and and let us open this up to further discussion. So Kristine, if you would advance the slide, I think that we had initially planned to kind of model how we had the kind of structure of the dialogues moving forward. And so because we started a little bit late and some of us went a little long, instead of having a discussion amongst the 5 of us here, like we will be doing moving forward there after each participant in subsequent webinars, and have talks a little bit about their orientation to the topic, then we have some time where the 2 dialogue partners can discuss, and then we open it up to the broader community. So I think we'll skip the dialogue amongst the 5 of us and then move into just trying to get a little bit of feedback from our INTEREACH community here. And so first, we'd love to know from all of you, how familiar are you with i2Insights? So just put a 0 in the chat if this is totally new to you. 1, if you're aware of it, but you haven't spent much time there. 2, you visit regularly, you get the newsletter. Or 3, this is integral to your work. All right, so far, seeing a good mix. So most people, it looks like, are at least familiar with it or aware of it. And a couple people, it's brand new. And then we do have a fair amount of people that visit regularly, read the newsletter. And please go to i2insights.org and sign up for the newsletter. It's fantastic. And a lot of people where it's or a good amount of people where it's integral to your work. Great. That's very helpful to know. So just in our last few minutes here, Kristine, if you would go to the next slide, and we'd like to hear from you. Since most of you are familiar with i2Insights, if you would share with us in the chat or speaking up here some of your favorite blog posts or how the blog has influenced your professional practice or career trajectory. And for those who are familiar or even not familiar with i2Insights, future directions for the blog and the community. If you're not familiar or you weren't familiar with i2Insights before this webinar, then please let us know what is important to you to have in a repository within this space from where you sit. So we'll just, we'll open up the chat here to anyone who would like to put anything in there for these 3 different areas, or anyone who'd like to speak up. You're welcome to raise your hand or just jump in. So I'll put it to the 3s out there. If someone who put down 3, who really this is integral to your work, if you could share a reflection on, yes, Chris.
Yes, hi. I have a question that is maybe going to be targeting Bethany, because it's really about the toolkits and the available tools that we have. And Gabrielle mentioned this too in her presentation. We no longer have access to the United States Science of Team Science toolkit, and I'm wondering if there's if the i2 Insights site is going to be really aggressively pursuing the gathering of toolkits as part of the blog.
Chris, do you mean the gathering of additional toolkits or more tools?
Well, I don't know, because we could have a discussion about tools versus toolkits, I think. Either one or the other. There, it just seems that there are tools out there and toolkits that we don't have access to anymore, that have kind of disappeared because they're not being maintained. And it's really too bad. So I know it takes money to do that kind of a thing, funding. So I'm wondering if there's a movement around tools or toolkits and or.
Yeah, I am not aware of any movement in the Science of Team Science community to recreate the site's toolkit or to move those resources to another repository like i2Insights. Does anyone else know or have insight into that?
I think Jenny Grabmeyer might be aware of a BII initiative. Is that what you were raising your hand about, Jenny, or a different thing?
It was a different thing.
Wayne, were you about to respond to Bethany's inquiry?
Yeah, so we had a little working committee a few years ago in Insights to look at this. So there's nothing active going on right now in Insights. I know there's been a lot of conversation off and on, and yeah, I don't know what's active, but it's something that Insights is very interested in supporting at some point. And Bethany knows more about it than I do because she chaired our little committee.
I did. I will say there is an effort in collaboration with the ITD Alliance and the ACTS, Team Science Professionals, SIG, and the Insights Education and Training, SIG, to compile a curated list of resources, dare I say a toolkit of team science training resources. And that's the most organized effort I've heard so far around team science specific resources. But that effort is still very new, and they are also thinking about these issues of where to host it, how to make sure it has longevity, and so forth. I'll just pause and say, Gabriele is really modeling and always has a lot of great practices for building a repository that works for most people, a broader suite of people, and that has longevity. Her work in actively decommissioning i2S into i2Insights, and then now her work in thinking about how to maintain it into the future are best practices that should be modeled where possible.
And it's important to note that doing something like this can take a lot of time, and we're all volunteers doing these kinds of extra things, but it'll take some person power to make this happen.
Thank you. Oh,
yeah, thank you. I know.
Just thinking, I halfway called on Jenny, and I know that we're over, but I bet you were about to do the same thing.
Go ahead, Jenny. That was an invitation.
Oh, well, actually, I put a little question for Kristine in the chat. So I was in answer to your original open question about what the blog has meant, and but this seems like a much more relevant or pressing conversation. Oh, and what I had messaged Kristine about is there is a compendium in the works that actually is funny for me to be bringing it up because Kristine is much more pivotal and yeah. So there was just a workshop with several NSF funded institutes, centers, integration, I guess it is an institute, specifically around convergence and practices to foster that. So it's still taking shape what exactly that will contain and how it will be a resource without duplicating, but also kind of capturing, all the questions about how to tackle any one aspect of these practices. So, but that's coming at some point next spring, probably.
And Jenny, for those of us who do have a few more minutes, I would actually love to hear from you what the blog has meant to you, if you are willing to just share a little bit of what you had originally intended.
Well, and I think actually it's just really echoing, I think something, you were the one who said it, the imperfectionism. I love team science because of the human elements, all the complexity and frailty and surprising beauty And I love the human pursuit of understanding team science and kind of studying it and all that. But I find it very personally energizing because there's a million right answers to most of the questions we're asking. And just knowing that it's okay to be imperfect, and it's profound. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this launch, and we'll keep you posted on upcoming webinars next month. I put this in the chat. Let me, I want to do it again before everyone hops off, but in November is going to be embodied in arts-based practices based on a couple of blog posts there by Jillian Student and Veronica Stanich. So please join us on November 11th. And again, we will continue sending out emails. But if you can, put a hold on your calendar for the second Tuesday at noon Eastern time from this point forward, and we'll keep everyone posted. So thanks, everyone. It's great to see many of you again, and welcome some new people today.